I want you to understand what you threw away, I said quietly, sliding photographs across the mahogany conference table. Our wedding day. Michael's birth. Sarah cradling her first art award. The Victorian house we'd renovated together, before and after. 25 years of shared history laid bare in a dozen images. Scott stared at them, his once confident posture now deflated, the expensive watch conspicuously absent from his wrist. Just 6 weeks after his dramatic Thanksgiving announcement, my husband of 25 years looked like a different man, one confronting the ruins of his carefully constructed life. That's enough, Mrs. Collins, his attorney interjected. We're here to negotiate terms, not reminisce. Kate Morrison, my divorce attorney, smiled coldly. Let's be clear about the situation. Fraud, identity theft, financial misrepresentation. She pushed documents across the table. These aren't mutual mistakes. The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Scott finally looked up, meeting my eyes with a mixture of resentment and fear. What do you want, Evelyn? He asked heavily. What did I want? 6 weeks ago, I would have said I wanted my marriage back. But that was before I discovered the extent of Scott's betrayal, before I learned that while I was building our life, he was secretly dismantling its foundation. I want a clean break, I replied. Complete separation. Thanksgiving dinner. 6 weeks earlier, Scott had stood at the head of our Thanksgiving table, wine glass raised as if proposing a toast. I'm leaving, Evelyn, he announced, his voice carrying the practiced confidence he used with new insurance clients. I'm in love with Amber. The turkey grew cold as stunned silence enveloped our dining room. Our son Michael froze with his fork halfway to his mouth. Our daughter Sarah stared at her plate, suddenly fascinated by cranberry sauce. My sister Linda's jaw literally dropped, while her husband Thomas seemed to find his napkin intensely interesting. She's 24, Scott continued with inappropriate pride, as if youth itself were an achievement. And she's everything you're not, Evelyn. In that moment, time seemed to stop. The crystal chandelier we'd purchased on our 15th anniversary cast prism like shadows across the table. I felt a sudden lightheadedness, as if watching the scene from somewhere above my body. 25 years of marriage, reduced to a dismissive comparison with a woman barely older than our daughter. My mother's voice echoed in my memory. Never let them see you break, Evie. She'd lived by that code after my father left, teaching high school by day and grading papers by night, showing the world nothing but composed resilience. Good timing, actually, I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I'm Evelyn Collins, 51 years old, senior accountant at Westridge Financial in Grand Rapids, Michigan. For a quarter century, I've balanced spreadsheets by day and family needs by night, building what I thought was a secure life with Scott, our 2 children, and our modest but comfortable home in the historic Heritage Hill neighborhood. What flashed through my mind wasn't anger, not yet, but a slideshow of moments. Scott holding my hand through childbirth, painting our first home together, dancing at Sarah's sweet 16. The crushing weight of realizing those memories no longer meant to him what they meant to me. We can discuss the details later, Scott said magnanimously, lifting his wine glass higher. To new beginnings. No one joined his toast. Sarah abruptly stood, tears streaming down her face, and rushed from the room. Michael glared at his father with a mixture of disgust and disbelief. I think you should leave, I said quietly. Scott's expression hardened. It's still my house, too, he replied, smugness in his tone suggesting he'd already calculated his advantage. I'll pack some things tomorrow. As our guests awkwardly excused themselves and Scott retreated to his study with the remains of the wine bottle, I began mechanically clearing dishes, my mind oddly calm despite the wreckage of my marriage strewn across the dining room. Flashback. The early years Scott and I met during our senior year at Michigan State. He was charming, ambitious, with a quick smile that seemed perpetually aimed in my direction. I was studious, organized, already planning my career in accounting. We balance each other, he'd said during his proposal on graduation day. Your steadiness grounds my dreams. My spontaneity keeps you from getting too serious. He slipped his grandmother's ring on my finger. We'll build something amazing together. I believed him then. Believed in us. After watching my mother struggle as a single parent after my father left for his secretary, the irony doesn't escape me. I was determined to build a marriage that would last. The early years were lean but happy. We saved diligently for a down payment on our Heritage Hill Victorian, a fixer-upper that consumed our weekends for nearly a decade. I took only 6 weeks of maternity leave with each child, returning to work while juggling the demands of motherhood and career. Scott's father had built and lost 3 businesses before drinking himself to an early grave. I won't be like him, Scott promised. I'll be successful, but I'll never put business before family. Another promise that eventually shattered. As Scott's insurance agency grew, so did his aspirations. The modest office expanded to a prime downtown location. His wardrobe gradually upgraded from department store suits to custom tailoring. He joined the country club, not for the golf he rarely played, but for the connections that might lead to high net worth clients. I supported these endeavors, believing they were investments in our shared future. My own career progressed steadily, if unspectacularly. I became known for my meticulous work and ethical standards, eventually reaching senior accountant status at Westridge Financial. My salary provided consistent support during the inevitable downturns in Scott's commission-based income. Warning signs. Looking back, I can identify the warning signs in my marriage. Scott's increasing criticism of my sensible clothing and predictable routines, his sudden interest in fitness at 49, the new convertible purchased without discussion, the late nights at the office that smelled of unfamiliar perfume. Men go through phases, my sister Linda assured me when I confided my concerns. Remember Uncle Frank at 50 with the motorcycle? This will pass. So I waited for the phase to pass, believing that 25 years of marriage had earned me patience and understanding. Even when Scott mentioned hiring Amber, describing her as bright and intuitive despite her lack of experience, I suppressed my unease. She was younger than our daughter, after all. Surely Scott wouldn't be so predictable. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I'd stopped by his office unexpectedly, bringing lunch as a surprise. The receptionist's pitying glance should have prepared me for finding his door locked, hushed giggling emanating from within. I left the sandwiches with the receptionist and drove back to work, telling myself there must be a reasonable explanation. I chose trust over suspicion, loyalty over evidence. That night, I stood in our walk-in closet, staring at my reflection. When had I become invisible to him? I touched the laugh lines around my eyes, earned from years of joy with our children. I studied the silver strands threading through my brown hair, each one a badge of experience. The woman looking back at me wasn't old. She was seasoned, capable, with the quiet confidence that comes from decades of meeting challenges head-on. Why couldn't Scott see that anymore? The inheritance. The night of Scott's announcement, after loading the dishwasher, I noticed the blinking light on our answering machine. I pressed play, hearing the familiar voice of my Uncle Frank's attorney. Evelyn, it's William Hamilton calling. I have some significant news regarding your uncle's estate. Please call me as soon as possible. Uncle Frank, my mother's brother, a lifelong bachelor who'd made a fortune in commercial real estate, had passed away 3 weeks earlier. I'd always been his favorite niece, but I had no expectations from his will beyond perhaps a keepsake or small remembrance. He'd been a constant presence in my life, taking me for ice cream after school when my mother worked late, attending every school play and graduation. You're the aunt to all those grasshoppers, he'd say during our monthly lunches, always preparing, always looking ahead. When he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 6 months ago, I'd visited him weekly, bringing home cooked meals he rarely ate in company he seemed to value more than I'd realized. The morning after Thanksgiving dawned with a crystalline clarity typical of Michigan Novembers. I'd slept fitfully on the living room sofa, unwilling to share the bedroom with Scott. He'd stumbled up the stairs well past midnight, the empty wine bottle abandoned in his study. I made coffee and called William Hamilton's office, leaving a message with his secretary. Still in yesterday's clothes, I walked upstairs to collect fresh attire, only to find Scott already awake and packing. Amber's apartment is too small for both of us, he explained without prompting, stuffing shirts into a suitcase. I'll be staying at the Parkview Hotel until we find something suitable. The casual use of the plural stung more than I expected. When did it start? I asked, my voice surprisingly calm. Scott paused, perhaps taken aback by my direct question. Does it matter? 25 years of marriage deserves at least honesty about its end, I counted. He sighed, sitting heavily on the bed we'd shared for decades. July, at the company picnic. She was interested, attentive. His expression took on a defensive edge. Do you know how long it's been since you were genuinely interested in anything about me, Evelyn? Amber listens. She's excited about my ideas, my plans. She's 24, I replied flatly. Everything is exciting at 24. It's not just the age, Scott insisted. She sees me, the real me, the me that got buried under mortgages and college funds and life insurance policies. I studied my husband. The thinning hair he'd recently started dyeing, the expensive watch that had replaced the one I'd given him on our 10th anniversary, the designer clothes that strained slightly against his middle-aged paunch. Who was this man who could throw away a quarter century of shared history for the admiration of someone barely older than our children? I think what hurts most, I said carefully, is that you didn't respect me enough to end things privately. Scott had the grace to look momentarily ashamed. Then his expression hardened. I needed witnesses. Your family needs to understand this isn't just some fling or midlife crisis they can talk you through. This is real. The calculated cruelty of his public announcement suddenly became clear. He'd wanted to humiliate me, to make reconciliation impossible, to shift blame for our marriage's end entirely onto his shoulders, so I wouldn't fight for it. I see, I said simply. The doorbell interrupted whatever Scott might have said next. I went downstairs to find a courier with a certified letter requiring my signature. The return address was William Hamilton's law firm. I opened it in the kitchen, scanning the formal legal language until the key phrases leapt from the page: sole beneficiary, controlling interest, comprehensive portfolio, and a figure that made me clutch the kitchen counter for support. 4.7 million. Uncle Frank, who had lived modestly despite his wealth, had left me his entire estate, the commercial properties, the investments, even his charitable foundation. The inheritance was structured as separate property established after my marriage, explicitly designated as belonging exclusively to me rather than the marital estate. The letter included a handwritten note from Uncle Frank. Evelyn, I've always admired your loyalty and strength. Life has a way of testing both. Consider this your safety net, whatever comes next. Somehow he had known, or at least suspected, that I might need independent means. Had he seen something in Scott that I had missed, or had my own concerns slipped into our conversations more than I realized? Upstairs, I could hear Scott on the phone, his voice animated as he described his liberation to Amber, presumably. My numbness was giving way to something else. Not quite anger, not quite relief, but a clarifying sense of possibility. Discovery and strategy. The next 2 weeks revealed the full extent of Scott's betrayal. After meeting with William Hamilton and confirming the details of my inheritance, I hired Kate Morrison, a divorce attorney specializing in cases involving fraud. Your uncle's private investigator uncovered something concerning, William explained during our meeting. 2 years ago, Scott took out a substantial business loan, using your house as collateral without your knowledge. Your signature was forged on the documents. I felt physically ill. The home we'd spent a decade renovating, where we'd raised our children, where I'd planted the cherry tree for our 20th anniversary, Scott had risked it all without a word to me. The loan was now in default, explaining Scott's urgency to discuss finances when we met at the Italian restaurant downtown where we'd once celebrated anniversaries in happier times. I've been thinking about the house, he'd said, studying me with slight confusion, perhaps expecting visible evidence of my devastation. It makes sense for you to stay there, of course, but given its value, we should discuss compensation. Compensation? The audacity was breathtaking. My share of the equity, he clarified. I'm thinking we could arrange a buyout over time. I know you don't have liquid assets to purchase my portion outright. Not only was he leaving me for a woman half my age, but he expected me to make payments to him while he built his new life. What I understood with perfect clarity, I told Kate during our strategy meeting, was that Scott saw me as nothing more than a financial resource to be drained before being discarded, a stepping stone to his new life with Amber. Kate's forensic accountant discovered Scott had not only defaulted on the fraudulent business loan but had opened credit cards in my name, running up substantial debt. More damning still, He'd been systematically falsifying his agency's financial records to conceal declining revenues, potentially insurance fraud. We have enough for criminal charges, not just divorce proceedings, Kate said bluntly. The question is, what do you want? What I wanted was complicated. Justice? Certainly. Protection of my assets? Absolutely. But revenge? The emotion felt foreign, unproductive. I want a fair resolution that acknowledges the reality of our situation, I told her, and I want to conclude it quickly. I thought of my mother, who'd spent years bitter after my father left, her anger consuming her energy that could have been directed toward rebuilding. I wouldn't make the same mistake. Confrontation. The plan was proceeding smoothly until Scott surprised me by bringing Amber to our house to collect some personal items. I arrived home from a meeting with Uncle Frank's property manager to find them in our bedroom. Scott packing cufflinks and watches while Amber lounged on our bed, scrolling through her phone. You must be Evelyn, she said without looking up. Scott's told me so much about you. I studied the young woman who had facilitated the destruction of my marriage. Pretty in the expected ways. Slim, blonde, with the confidence of someone who hadn't yet encountered significant disappointment. She wore expensive clothes that still had the fresh shine of recent purchase. Scott's $47,000 walking and talking. My mother would have maintained dignified silence. But standing in the doorway of the bedroom where I'd spent 25 years of my life, watching this stranger casually invade my most private space, something inside me shifted. Has he told you about the fraud investigation? I asked pleasantly. Amber's head snapped up. What? Scott emerged from the closet, his expression thunderous. Evelyn, that's enough. Enough of the defaulted loan, the forged signatures, the credit card debt. My voice remained calm, but inside, years of suppressed emotion were finally finding release. She's lying, Scott told Amber, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Am I? I removed a folder from my bag, extending it toward Amber. These are copies of the relevant documents. You might want to reconsider hitching your wagon to a sinking ship. Scott lunged for the folder, but Amber was quicker, grabbing it and leafing through the contents with increasing alarm. What is this? She demanded, holding up a credit card statement. You said you were taking me to Paris after the divorce. I can explain, Scott began, but Amber was already moving toward the door, folder clutched to her chest. You said you were financially secure, she accused. You said Evelyn was the problem. After she left, Scott turned on me with cold fury. You've ruined everything. I looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in years. Behind the anger, I saw fear. Behind the bravado, desperation. The man I'd married was still in there somewhere, buried beneath layers of insecurity and self-deception. You managed that entirely on your own, I replied, not with triumph, but with a strange mix of sadness and liberation. The settlement. The terms of our settlement were simple. Scott signed over all rights to the house. He relinquished any claim to my inheritance or business interests. He agreed to pay back the fraudulent loan and credit card debt. That's everything. Scott protested during the settlement conference. What am I supposed to live on? I slid a final document across the table. The deed to a small commercial property on the outskirts of Grand Rapids, recently purchased with a portion of my inheritance. This building houses your insurance agency, I explained. The lease is paid for 5 years. It's your fresh start, Scott. More than you deserve, but less than you expected. His eyes widened as understanding dawned. You own my building now? I own a lot of things now, I replied calmly. Sign the papers. He did, his hand trembling slightly. His attempt to craft a triumphant exit from our marriage had instead left him humbled, diminished. Amber never returned, having quickly calculated the diminished returns of a relationship with a man facing financial ruin. Why had I given him the building? Not from lingering affection, though 25 years couldn't be erased overnight. Not from pity, though seeing him diminished brought me no joy. Perhaps it was simply that living well would be my best revenge, and living generously would be my way of showing that he hadn't broken me. New beginnings. 6 months after the Thanksgiving that ended my marriage, I stood in the lobby of Collins Properties, watching workers install the new company signage. The commercial real estate firm I had inherited from Uncle Frank now bore my name, a symbolic reclamation of my identity. Michael and Sarah had processed their father's betrayal in different ways. Sarah maintained a cold distance, agreeing to occasional lunches but refusing to discuss anything personal. Michael, after initial anger, had settled into a cautious, limited relationship with his father. Both had expressed quiet pride in how I'd handled the situation. "You didn't let him destroy you," Sarah observed during a recent dinner at her college apartment. "That's what he wanted, wasn't it? To break you so he wouldn't have to feel guilty." Perhaps she was right. The public announcement, the casual cruelty, they had been designed to cast me as the discarded wife, a role that would justify his actions to our social circle and, more importantly, to himself. Instead, I had emerged stronger, wealthier, and remarkably whole. The accounting skills I'd applied throughout my career now served me well as I expanded Uncle Frank's property holdings, adding 3 buildings to the portfolio in my first 6 months of ownership. I'd also doubled the Educational Foundation's annual scholarship awards, focusing on women pursuing financial and business education. Scott's insurance agency continued operating in my building, our only point of connection a monthly electronic rent payment. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd attempted online dating with limited success. Women his own age found his history concerning. Younger women lost interest when they discovered his financial constraints. As the installation crew finished mounting the sign, my phone chimed with a calendar reminder: dinner with William Hamilton to discuss the foundation's next initiatives. Outside, spring had transformed Grand Rapids from winter gray to vibrant green. At 51, I was starting over, not with resignation, but with anticipation, curiosity, and a hard-earned wisdom about the difference between value and worth. The future stretched before me, unwritten and entirely my own. My mother had taught me resilience through example. Uncle Frank had given me financial independence through foresight. But the most valuable gift had come from an unexpected source. Scott's betrayal had forced me to rediscover myself, to recognize my own strength and capacity for renewal. Sometimes, endings are just beginnings in disguise.